There is a moment that happens in every room, every gathering, every social setting you have ever walked into. It lasts about 3 seconds. Nobody announces it, nobody scores it, but everyone feels it. Two men walk in. The first one arrives loudly. His energy precedes him. He is dressed to be noticed. His laugh comes fast and easy. He makes sure the room knows he is present. On the surface, he looks like a man who has it together. He performs confidence the way a man performs it, when he has studied what confidence is supposed to look like. The second man walks in differently. Not slowly for effect, not quietly out of shyness. He simply enters without needing the room to confirm him. He looks around without scanning for approval. He speaks when he has something to say. He does not fill the silence because silence does not threaten him. Now here is the honest truth that most men spend years not understanding. The room does not respond to volume, it responds to weight. And those are not the same thing. We were taught, most of us, somewhere between adolescence and our first real experiences with rejection, that attraction is a performance, that the man who gets noticed is the man who earns the result. So we learn to perform, we learn to project. We bought into the idea that presence is built through output, through how much space you can occupy, through how entertaining or impressive or visible you can make yourself. And that belief is not entirely wrong. It just stops working around the age you are now, because the men and women in that room have also lived long enough to know the difference between signal and noise. What the room is reading in those 3 seconds has nothing to do with your jacket or your joke or how smoothly you carried yourself through the door. It is reading your nervous system. It is reading whether you need something from this room or whether you simply showed up. That is the distinction almost no one talks about directly, and it is the one that matters most. So the real question is not how to enter a room better. The real question is what is actually being communicated before a single word leaves your mouth, and why calm carries so much more information than flash ever could. Let's be honest about something that most content in this space is too polite to say directly. Flashiness is not confidence. It is the performance of confidence by a man who has not yet found the real thing. And the reason that distinction matters is not to shame anyone. It is because most of us, at some point in our lives, have been that man. And a lot of us are still him in ways we have not fully examined. Think about what flashiness actually requires. It requires an audience. It requires reaction. It requires the room to respond in a specific way for the feeling it produces to last, and that dependency is the tell. Because genuine confidence does not need a particular outcome to remain intact. It exists before the room responds. It exists even when the room does not respond at all. What drives a man toward flash is almost never arrogance. That is the misreading most people make. Arrogance implies an excess of self-belief. What actually drives most flashy behavior is its opposite. It is a deep, unresolved uncertainty about whether the man beneath the performance is enough on his own. The watch, the story, the joke landed at volume, the subtle name drop, the car mentioned just slightly too early in the conversation. These are not the behaviors of a man overflowing with self-assurance. They are the behaviors of a man working very hard to prevent you from looking too closely. And here's where it gets psychologically precise. The human brain, particularly under social stress, defaults to compensation. When a man does not feel internally solid, he builds external structure to substitute for that solidity. This is not weakness. It is actually an intelligent short-term adaptation. The problem is that it calcifies. What begins as a response to insecurity slowly becomes an identity. The performance becomes the personality. And at that point, the man is no longer choosing to be flashy. He simply does not know who he is without it. This is worth sitting with, especially for men in their 40s and 50s who have built entire social identities around achievement, status, and the projection of strength. Because at some point, the things you use to signal your value start to feel less like assets and more like obligations. The lifestyle that was supposed to make you feel secure starts to require more and more maintenance, and the validation it produces lasts shorter and shorter periods of time before the hunger returns. That cycle is exhausting, and the men who recognize it in themselves are usually the ones closest to something more sustainable. Because here is what that exhaustion is actually pointing toward. It is pointing toward the limits of external architecture as a substitute for internal ground. Every man who has chased enough external markers of success and still felt the unease underneath knows exactly what that sentence means. A flash is a signal, yes, but it is not the signal most men think it is. It signals effort. It signals hunger. It signals a man still in the process of becoming rather than a man who has arrived somewhere real. So if flashiness is the symptom of internal instability, the obvious question becomes this: what is calm actually the signal of, and why does it register so differently in the people around you? Attraction feels mysterious because we experience it emotionally, but underneath that emotional experience, there is a biological and psychological architecture that is remarkably consistent and remarkably logical once you understand what it is actually measuring. Start with the nervous system, because that is where this begins for every human being in every social interaction you have ever had. Your nervous system is not passive. It is constantly scanning the environment, reading other people's physiological states, and making rapid assessments about safety, threat, and resource. This process happens beneath conscious awareness. It happens before thought, and it shapes how you feel about someone before you have formed a single rational opinion about them. There is a concept in neuroscience called co-regulation. It describes the way one person's regulated nervous system can directly calm another person's dysregulated one. You have experienced this without knowing what to call it. It is the feeling of being around someone who is genuinely at ease and noticing that your own tension begins to release. It is not magic, it is biology. A calm, grounded presence does not just feel attractive, it feels safe. And safety, at the neurological level, is one of the most powerful draws one human being can have on another. Now translate that into the social dynamics most men navigate daily. When a man enters a room in a state of genuine regulation, meaning his nervous system is not fired up with the need to impress or defend or perform, the people around him pick that up immediately. Not consciously in most cases, but their bodies register it, and their bodies begin to orient toward him the way a room orients toward a source of warmth. The flashy man produces a different neurological response. His high output energy activates the nervous systems around him. Some people find that exciting in the short term, but excitement and attraction are not the same thing. Excitement is stimulation. Attraction, particularly the kind that deepens over time and across contexts, is closer to trust. And trust is built not through stimulation, but through consistency, steadiness, and the repeated experience of someone who does not destabilize the room. There is also a psychological dimension here that operates through status signaling, and it runs counter to what most men assume. Research in social psychology consistently shows that high-status individuals across cultures and contexts tend to move more slowly, speak more deliberately, react less urgently, and require less external validation to maintain their composure. Stillness in the social brain reads as a marker of someone who has nothing to prove because they have already arrived somewhere. Flash reads as someone still trying to get there. This is why calm registers as rare. In a culture saturated with noise, stimulation, and men performing their value at volume, a man who simply exists without needing the room to confirm him stands out not by trying to stand out, but by being genuinely different at the level that people's nervous systems can detect and cannot easily ignore. Attraction is not mysterious. It is biological, psychological, and deeply readable once you know what the signals actually mean. Which brings the question that matters most. If this kind of calm is what registers so powerfully, is it something a man can actually build in himself, or is it simply a temperament some men are born with and others will never have? This is the part where most content in this space gets it wrong, because once men understand that calm is attractive, the immediate instinct is to perform calm, to slow down the voice, to pause before responding, to project a kind of deliberate stillness the way you might adjust your posture before walking into a meeting. And that instinct is understandable. But it misses the point so completely that it often makes things worse. Perform calm is readable. Not always consciously, but it registers. There is a particular quality to a man who is managing his presentation versus a man who simply does not need to manage it. One requires effort you can almost sense beneath the surface. The other requires nothing because it is not a layer added on top of the man. It is the man. So the real question is not how to appear calm. It is how a man actually becomes calm. And the honest answer is that it is not a technique. It is a result. It is what happens on the other side of a specific kind of internal work that most men either avoid entirely or do not know how to begin. That work starts with unresolved noise. Every man carries it. The conversation with his father that never happened. The version of himself he was supposed to become by now that quietly haunts the version he actually is. The anger he learned to convert into ambition because ambition was acceptable and anger was not. The grief he skipped because there was no space for it and life kept moving. These are not abstract psychological concepts. These are the specific weights that keep a man's nervous system running hotter than it needs to, scanning for threats that are no longer present, defending against judgments that exist mostly in his own mind. A man who has not addressed that noise does not become calm by deciding to be calm. He becomes tense while pretending to be calm, which is its own particular kind of exhausting. But a man who has done the work of actually looking at his life, his patterns, his unfinished emotional business, and has moved through enough of it to no longer be controlled by it, that man does not need to perform anything. His calm is not a strategy, it is the natural state of a man who is no longer at war with himself. And here is what that looks like in practice, not as a list of behaviors, but as a felt reality. It looks like a man who can sit in silence without filling it, who can hear criticism without collapsing or retaliating, who can be around attractive, successful, or powerful people without shrinking or overcorrecting, who can want things deeply without his entire sense of self depending on whether he gets them, who can be present in a conversation because he is actually there, not rehearsing his next point or managing how he is being perceived. That is not passivity. That is one of the hardest things a man can build, because it requires him to stop outsourcing his stability to outcomes, to other people's opinions, to the next achievement, or the next relationship, or the next proof that he is enough. It also requires time. Real calm, earned calm, tends to be a quality of men who have lived enough to have lost things, survived things, and made peace with the distance between who they imagined they would be and who they actually are. That peace is not resignation, it is honesty. And honesty, worn quietly, is one of the most compelling things a mature man can carry into any room. Which is why attraction at this level is not really about attraction at all. It is about something deeper that people are reading in you, something that has nothing to do with how you look or what you own or how well you perform. What they are actually responding to is something much more fundamental than any of that. Here is the simplest way to say what this entire conversation has been building toward. People are not responding to your presentation, they are responding to your reality. And the older you get, the harder those two things are to separate, because life has a way of eroding the gap between them, whether you intend it to or not. When a woman is drawn to a calm man, she is not responding to a technique he has mastered or a frequency he has learned to project. She is responding to evidence, evidence that this man has met himself honestly, that he is not running from something, that his presence in a room or in a relationship or in a difficult moment will feel like ground rather than weather. That is not a small thing. In a world full of men performing stability while privately unraveling, a man who has actually built it from the inside is genuinely rare. And it is not only women. Every meaningful context in a man's life, his friendships, his professional relationships, his standing in the rooms that matter to him, responds to the same signal. People trust men who do not need to be trusted loudly. They follow men who do not need to demand followership. They are drawn toward men who are simply, consistently, undeniably themselves. That is what calm communicates at its deepest level. Not detachment, not indifference, not the careful management of expression. It communicates that a man knows who he is, has made a degree of peace with what that means, and no longer requires the world to complete him. You cannot fake that. You cannot purchase it or perform it into existence. But you can build it quietly, honestly, over time, through the kind of self-examination that most men postpone and the most compelling men eventually stop avoiding. The question worth sitting with is not how to become more attractive. It is how close you are to the man you would be if you finally stopped performing and simply became him. That is the work, and it is worth doing.